They told me she didn't like working with people, which sounded like the kind of polite lie you tell right before someone disappears from the roster. The station drifted at the edge of mapped space, a cold ring of steel and light wrapped around nothing in particular, the kind of place where assignments went quiet and records went cleaner than they should. I had been there for exactly 14 minutes when I noticed no one would meet my eyes. Not the tech at intake, not the officer handing me my clearance band, not even the maintenance drone that politely adjusted its path to avoid me like I carried something contagious. "You're assigned to Commander Lyra Vane," the officer said, sliding the data slate across the counter with 2 fingers, like proximity might be negotiable. I glanced at the file. It wasn't empty, which would have been less concerning. It was full, just edited. Redactions layered over reports, annotations that ended mid-sentence, a performance record that oscillated between exceptional and unavailable. "What does she command?" I asked. The officer hesitated for half a second, which in bureaucratic time was a confession. "You'll see," he said. That was the moment I considered that maybe I hadn't messed up. Maybe I'd been selected. That thought didn't improve anything. The corridor to her lab curved slightly, gravity humming at a level that felt almost intentional, like the station preferred you a little off balance. Doors sealed behind me with quiet certainty. No guards, no escorts, just a long stretch of polished floor and the soft, persistent awareness that something ahead was the reason everyone else had stepped aside. I paused outside the final door, adjusted the sleeve of a jacket that had seen better assignments, and told myself the same thing I always did when the situation didn't add up. If this goes badly, at least it will be efficient. The door opened before I touched it. The room inside was bright, not harsh, just precise, like it had opinions about clarity. Interfaces hovered in layered arcs, data moving in slow, deliberate streams. And at the center of it all stood Commander Lyra Vane. At first glance, she looked almost human. Same proportions, same stillness, same quiet authority that made space feel organized around her. Then you noticed the details. The way her ears angled subtly, responding to something I couldn't hear. The way her posture wasn't relaxed so much as perfectly controlled, like every movement had already been evaluated and approved. She turned her head toward me, and the room did something strange. It didn't quiet. It focused. Her gaze settled on me, steady, measuring, and for a moment that stretched just a fraction longer than it should have, she didn't say anything. I had the distinct impression that if she decided I didn't belong here, the station would agree with her. "Ethan Cole," I said, because introducing myself seemed statistically safer than standing there like a misplaced object. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in hostility, but in recognition of something that hadn't been labeled yet. Another second passed. Somewhere behind me, the door sealed with a soft click that sounded final in a way doors shouldn't. I waited for the dismissal, the correction, the polite redirection to somewhere less interesting. It didn't come. Instead, she took a small step closer, close enough that I could see faint lines of data reflecting in her eyes, and said, very calmly, "Stay." The word landed like a system command. Somewhere in the room, an interface flickered, then stabilized. I blinked once. "That's good," I said, because dry humor had gotten me through worse, because I didn't have a backup plan. For the briefest moment, something shifted in her expression. Not a smile, not even close, just a reduction in tension, like a variable had changed. Her gaze moved past me, to the main console, then back again. "We will test something," she said. It wasn't a request. I stepped forward anyway. The console responded as I approached, light adjusting, systems aligning, and I felt it before I saw it. A subtle recalibration, like the station itself was reconsidering its assumptions. I glanced at the display, recognized the error pattern immediately, and reached out without thinking. "You've got a feedback loop in the tertiary layer," I said. "It's compensating for a fluctuation that doesn't exist anymore." My fingers moved across the interface, rerouting, isolating, correcting. It took maybe 10 seconds. 15 if you counted the moment I hesitated because no one had told me I was allowed to touch anything. The system stabilized with a soft tone that sounded almost relieved. I leaned back slightly. "That should hold," I said. Silence followed. Not empty silence. The kind that builds pressure. I looked up. Lyra was watching me differently now. Not like an unknown variable. Like a confirmed one. "That system," she said slowly, Does not accept input from unverified personnel. I nodded. It seemed open to negotiation. Her ears shifted just slightly. Then she stepped closer again, close enough that the air between us felt measured, and the console behind me flickered once more, not in error this time, but in recognition. She glanced at it, then back at me, and for the first time, her voice carried something that wasn't entirely controlled. That system, she repeated, softer now, only responds to me. Another flicker. Another confirmation tone. I followed her gaze to the display, where a new line of text had appeared without being prompted. Access link established. I exhaled slowly. That's new, I said. Lyra didn't look away from the screen. Yes, she said. Then, almost to herself, it should not be. The console did not dim after the confirmation, which was the first sign that whatever had just happened was not finished. Systems like this preferred closure, a clean acknowledgement, a return to baseline. Instead, the interface remained active, lines of data adjusting in slow, deliberate patterns as if it were thinking about me in real time. I leaned slightly to the side, giving the display a respectful amount of space, the way you did with machinery that could quietly decide you were unnecessary. Is it going to do that again? I asked, keeping my voice even. Or should I start pretending I understand what is happening? Lyra did not answer immediately. Her attention stayed fixed on the shifting data, her posture unchanged except for the subtle angle of her head, like she was listening to something beyond the audible range. It is recalibrating, she said at last. Based on you. I considered that. That seems like a design flaw, I said. I am not particularly stable. That earned a reaction, small but measurable. The tension in her shoulders reduced by a fraction, her gaze flicking toward me for half a second before returning to the console. The system disagrees, she said. It rarely does. The door behind me remained closed. I had the distinct impression it would stay that way until the room decided otherwise. Somewhere in the station, a distant hum shifted pitch, not louder, just different, like a structure adjusting its weight. I had learned a long time ago that when environments started behaving like participants, it was best to pay attention. You said it only responds to you, I said. That sounds less like a preference and more like a rule. It is a rule, she replied. Encoded at the core level. I nodded slowly. Then either I broke it, I said, or I qualify for it. The second option hung in the air longer than it should have. Lyra turned fully toward me this time, her expression controlled, but her eyes sharper now, searching with a level of focus that felt almost physical. Humans do not qualify, she said. It was not dismissive. It was precise. I shrugged lightly. We are very good at not reading the manual. A faint sound escaped her, not quite a laugh, not quite anything I could categorize, but enough to confirm that the situation had shifted again, just slightly, in my favor. The console pulsed once, then displayed a new sequence, deeper access layers unfolding without prompt. I glanced at it, then back at her. Is it supposed to show that? I asked. No, she said. Her voice was quieter now, lower, like she was choosing each word more carefully than before. She stepped closer again, close enough that the space between us felt intentional, measured down to the inch. Do not interact with it further, she added. I raised my hand slightly in a gesture of compliance. I am very comfortable not touching things that might explode metaphorically or otherwise. Another flicker. Another adjustment. The system did not shut me out. It did not restrict access. If anything, it seemed to be aligning, parameters shifting to accommodate my presence in a way that was not subtle anymore. I watched it for a moment, then exhaled slowly. I am starting to think this is not about the system, I said. That is an accurate assessment, Lyra replied. Her gaze moved from the console back to me, steady, unreadable except for the faintest trace of something new beneath it. Not hostility, not even suspicion. Recognition, maybe, but not the comfortable kind. The kind that asked questions instead of answering them. You will remain assigned here, she said. It was not a decision I was invited to participate in. That was always the plan, I said. No, she corrected calmly. It was not. That landed harder than it should have. Somewhere in the station, something synchronized, a distant system aligning with the one in front of us, like a second voice joining the conversation. I glanced back at the display. The confirmation line had not disappeared. It had expanded. Access link established had become something longer, something more specific, and for the first time, I felt a small, inconvenient certainty settle in. Whatever this was, it was not temporary. "Commander," I said carefully, "if this is the part where you tell me I am not allowed to leave, I would appreciate a little warning." Lyra held my gaze, completely still now, every trace of earlier restraint replaced by something quieter and far more decisive. "You are not allowed to leave," she said. Then, after a brief pause that carried more weight than the sentence itself, she added, almost as if confirming it to herself, "and neither is the system." The words settled into the room with a kind of quiet finality that made the air feel structured, like the station had just updated its rules and forgotten to notify anyone involved. I considered arguing, then decided against it. In my experience, systems that locked doors without visible effort were not particularly interested in negotiation. "That is a strong policy for someone who just met me," I said, keeping my tone light, because panic was rarely productive and almost never stylish. Lyra did not react to the attempt at humor this time. Her attention had shifted back to the console, where the data continued to reorganize itself in patterns that felt less like diagnostics and more like recognition. "You were not expected," she said. "The system is adjusting to that fact." I followed her gaze, watching the interface refine its parameters, deeper layers opening like doors that had not been used in a long time. "I get that a lot," I said. "Usually it ends with paperwork." The console pulsed again, a softer tone this time, almost confirming something it had already decided. New lines appeared, more structured now, less exploratory. I did not need to understand the language to recognize intent. This was not scanning anymore. This was linking. "That does not look like adjustment," I said carefully. "That looks like acceptance." Lyra was silent for a moment, and in that silence I noticed something I had missed before. The room was not just bright. It was precise. Every surface responded to her presence, micro-adjustments in light, in gravity, in the way the air circulated, as if the entire environment had been calibrated around her baseline. And now, very subtly, those calibrations were shifting again. Not toward me. Not exactly. But no longer exclusively hers. "It should not accept you," she said, quieter now, the words carrying more weight than their volume suggested. "Then it has poor judgment," I replied. "I have been told that before." That almost worked. Her expression did not change, but something in her posture eased, the kind of movement you only noticed if you were looking for it. She stepped closer to the console, her hand hovering just above the interface without touching it. "If you interfere further, it may escalate," she said. "That sounds like a warning," I said. "It is a statement," she corrected. I nodded slowly. "Understood. I will limit my interference to breathing and standing." Another pause. The system did not reset. It did not reject me. If anything, it continued to integrate, pulling in data from adjacent systems, syncing with something deeper in the station architecture. I felt it then, not physically, but as a shift in awareness, like the moment you realized a quiet room had been. Listening the entire time. "You said I was not supposed to be here," I said. "So what was supposed to happen?" Lyra's gaze flickered toward me, then away, as if the answer was both obvious and inconvenient. "Another assignment," she said. "Another failure." I let that sit for a second. "I try to avoid being either of those," I said. The console chimed again, sharper this time, and a new layer unfolded across the display, something labeled in a structure I could not read but instinctively understood as restricted. It did not ask for permission. It did not request authorization. It simply opened. Lyra's hand lowered slightly, not touching, but close enough that the system reacted, light intensifying around her fingers. Then, without warning, it responded to me as well. A mirrored glow appeared along the edge of the interface nearest to where I stood, synchronized, balanced. A feeling this was not a routine assignment. The tone from the console did not fade this time. It settled into a steady resonance that felt less like an alert and more like a heartbeat the station had decided to share, and I became aware of something else, something just outside the room, movement that was too coordinated to be random. "We are no longer alone," I said quietly, because stating the obvious sometimes helped organize it. Lyra did not turn toward the door, which told me she had already noticed. "They are early," she said, and there was no irritation in her voice, only calculation. That was somehow worse. The door behind me unlocked with a soft, polite sound that did not match the weight of what followed. It opened just enough to admit 3 figures, all wearing the same controlled expressions people used when they were trying not to react to something they did not understand. None of them stepped fully inside at first. They paused at the threshold, as if the room itself required permission. Their eyes moved from Lyra to the console, and then to me, and that was where the stillness broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a subtle shift, shoulders tightening, breathing adjusting, the kind of reaction that said more than words ever would. "Commander," one of them said, voice carefully neutral. "We detected an unauthorized system expansion." Lyra did not move away from the console. "Define unauthorized," she replied. It was not a challenge. It was a test. The man hesitated for half a second. Again, that half second mattered. "The core interface has initiated a dual recognition protocol," he said. "That configuration does not exist in the system architecture." I exhaled softly. "It does now," I said, mostly to myself. 3 sets of eyes shifted to me in perfect unison. That was new. Lyra's gaze did not follow theirs. She was still watching the console, as if it might change its mind if she looked away. "He interacted with the interface," she said. The statement was simple. The implications were not. "He should not have been able to." Another voice added, sharper this time, less controlled. "Correct," Lyra said. Silence followed, heavier now, filling the space between everyone in the room. I leaned slightly to the side, giving them a clearer view of the display, because hiding things from people who already knew something was wrong tended to escalate situations unnecessarily. "In my defense," I said, "it looked like it needed help." No one laughed. That seemed consistent with the overall mood. The console pulsed again, and this time the light extended beyond the immediate interface, tracing faint lines along the walls, connecting to subsystems that had been dormant or simply uninterested until now. The room responded, lighting shifting by a fraction, gravity stabilizing to a degree that felt almost deliberate, like it had found a new reference point. One of the officials took a step back without realizing it. "It is syncing," he said, voice lower now. "With what?" someone else asked. No one answered. Lyra finally turned, just enough to face them without fully breaking her alignment with the system. "Seal the sector," she said calmly. "No external access. No internal transfers." That got a reaction. Not panic. Not quite. But something close enough to it that the difference did not matter. "Commander, that requires council authorization," the first man said. Lyra's eyes shifted to him, and for the first time since they had entered, I saw the full weight of her authority. It was not loud. It did not need to be. "Then inform them," she said. "After the sector is sealed." The room adjusted again, this time socially, hierarchy reasserting itself in a way that left no room for debate. The man inclined his head, just slightly, and stepped back toward the door, already issuing commands through a channel I could not hear. The others followed, slower, their attention lingering on the console, on me, on the fact that something fundamental had just changed and no one had approved it. The door closed behind them, softer than before, as if it understood the situation required discretion. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. "I feel like I should apologize," I said. "But I am not entirely sure for what." Lyra turned back to me fully now, the distance between us measured in inches and implications. "You should not apologize," she said. "You should understand." I nodded slowly. "I am working on that." The console pulsed once more, deeper, more confident, and the display updated again, adding another line beneath the existing confirmation. I did not recognize the language, but I understood the structure. It was not identifying me. It was pairing me. Lyra read it in silence, her expression unreadable for a moment that stretched longer than the others. Then, very quietly, as if the room itself was not yet authorized to hear it, she said, "It is not just recognizing you." I glanced at the display, then back at her. "That was my concern," I said. She held my gaze, steady, unblinking, and something in her control shifted again, not breaking, but adjusting to accommodate a reality she had not planned for. "It is binding you," she said. And this time, she did not sound uncertain at all. "Binding usually implies consent," I said, watching the line of text settle into the system as if it had always been there, and we were the ones catching up, and I do not remember signing anything. The console did not respond with humor, which felt consistent with its personality so far. Lyra remained still for a moment, her gaze fixed on the display, her posture controlled in that precise way that suggested she was already calculating outcomes 3 steps ahead. "It is not a legal construct," she said. "It is structural." I nodded slowly. "That sounds worse." The faint lines of light along the walls deepened, extending outward in quiet pathways that linked this room to something larger, something distributed across the station's architecture like a network that had just decided to wake up. I became aware of the air again, how it moved, how it adjusted, like the environment itself was aligning around a new baseline. Not hers alone anymore. Not mine either. Something shared. "You said it only recognizes one authority," I said. "So if it is binding me, that means one of 2 things." Lyra did not look at me, but I could tell she was listening. "Either I replaced you," I continued, "which seems unlikely given how calm you are, or the system just changed its rules." That was when she turned. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with intention. "It does not change its rules," she said. "It reveals them." That landed differently. I glanced back at the console, at the layered data that continued to organize itself with increasing confidence. "So this was always possible," I said. "And no one knew." "No one qualified," she corrected. The room held that sentence for a moment, weighing it, testing it against everything that had come before. I let out a slow breath. "I have a talent for qualifying for things I do not understand," I said. "It has not been particularly helpful so far." The system pulsed again, deeper this time, and a new sequence unfolded across the display, one that did not just present information but seemed to request alignment. Not from me directly. From both of us. I felt it in the way the light balanced between our positions, in the way the interface no longer centered itself on a single point but stretched, evenly, as if expecting to. Lyra stepped closer to the console, her hand hovering again, but this time the system responded before she could act, light rising to meet her, then mirroring along the edge nearest to me. She stopped, not because she hesitated, but because she understood something had shifted beyond her direct control. "Do not move," she said quietly. I stayed exactly where I was. "I was not planning to," I replied. "This seems like a moment where stillness is a good strategy." Her eyes flicked to mine, just briefly, and there it was again, that subtle reduction in tension, like a variable she had not accounted for was now behaving in a predictable way. "It is establishing a synchronized channel," she said, "between us." I considered that. "That sounds collaborative," I said. "It is not optional," she replied. The distinction mattered. The console emitted a low tone, and for a brief second, everything in the room aligned perfectly, light, sound, even the faint hum beneath the floor, as if the station had reached a point of agreement with itself. Then the display updated again. Not a warning, not a command, a designation. Lyra read it first. I could tell by the way her expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough that I knew something significant had just been defined. "What does it say?" I asked. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked at me, fully now, her gaze steady, measuring, and for the first time since this started, there was no distance in it, no calculated separation between commander and assignment. "It identifies you," she said slowly, "as a secondary authority node." I let that settle. "Secondary sounds modest," I said. "I appreciate the restraint." She did not react to the humor this time. Her attention had already moved beyond it. "There is no secondary in this system," she said. "Only integrated." The word hung in the air, heavier than the others. Integrated did not mean temporary. It did not mean replaceable. It meant necessary. The console pulsed once more, and somewhere beyond the room, deeper in the station, something responded, a distant synchronization that felt less like a reaction and more like recognition spreading outward. Lyra's gaze shifted past me for a fraction of a second, as if she could see through the walls, through the structure itself. "The network is expanding the link," she said. "It is propagating." I followed her line of thought, even if I did not fully understand the mechanics. "So this is not contained," I said. "No," she replied. Then she looked back at me, and this time there was no uncertainty at all, only a clear, precise conclusion forming in her voice. "And now," she said, "everyone else will know." The station did not announce the change, but it acknowledged it in quieter ways, the kind that settled into routines and made them feel different without asking permission. The lighting along the corridor outside shifted by a fraction, aligning to a pattern that did not match previous cycles, and somewhere deeper in the structure, systems that had remained dormant began to synchronize, not loudly, not urgently, just with the steady confidence of something that had finally found the correct configuration. I noticed it in the way the air felt more stable, less variable, like the environment had stopped compensating and started agreeing. Lyra noticed it before I did. Of course she did. Her posture adjusted slightly, not tense, not relaxed, but recalibrated, like she was aligning herself with something new rather than resisting it. It has reached the outer grid, she said quietly. I followed her gaze, though there was nothing visible to follow, only the sense that the room was no longer isolated. That sounds like a bad milestone, I said. It is a definitive one, she replied. The door did not open this time. It signaled first, a soft chime that carried more weight than the sound suggested, and then it parted just enough to admit a single figure. He stepped inside with the kind of measured confidence that came from authority reinforced over time, not asserted in the moment. His uniform was unremarkable in design but precise in detail, the kind that told you rank without needing to display it. His eyes moved through the room once, taking in the console, the light patterns, Lyra, and then finally me. That was where his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. "Commander," he said, inclining his head slightly toward Lyra. "We have confirmation from the Central Council." He did not look away from me as he spoke. "The link has propagated beyond containment." I shifted my weight slightly, because standing completely still was starting to feel like participation in something I did not fully understand. "I am getting that impression," I said. His gaze sharpened, not hostile, but precise, like he was measuring something against a standard I could not see. "You are the human assigned to this sector," he said. It was not a question. "I am beginning to think that assignment was optimistic," I replied. Lyra did not interrupt. She was watching him now, the same way she had watched the system earlier, not evaluating his authority, but assessing his response to it. "The Council is requesting immediate clarification," he continued, "specifically regarding the emergence of a secondary authority signature." I glanced at the console, then back at him. "That sounds like me," I said. "It does," he replied. The pause that followed was deliberate. "It should not." "That has come up," I said. The faintest flicker of something crossed his expression, not quite amusement, not quite disbelief, but enough to confirm that he was not entirely immune to the situation's absurdity. "The system has not recognized a dual authority in recorded history," he said. "Then history might need an update," I replied. Lyra's attention shifted back to the console as it pulsed again, the light now extending beyond the immediate room in patterns that felt less exploratory and more assertive, like the network was no longer testing the connection but reinforcing it. "It is stabilizing," she said, "across multiple nodes." The man took a step closer, careful, measured, as if proximity itself required justification. "Can it be reversed?" he asked. Lyra did not answer immediately. She watched the display, the way it balanced between us, the way it refused to collapse back into a single point of control. "No," she said at last. The word was quiet, but it carried finality. The man exhaled slowly, not frustrated, not alarmed, but adjusting, recalculating in real time. "Then the Council will need to redefine access protocols," he said, "and authority structure." I raised a hand slightly. "Before that becomes a formal discussion," I said, "I would like to confirm whether this situation involves me doing anything differently, or if I should continue standing here and letting the system make decisions on my behalf." His eyes returned to me, sharper now. "You are already part of the decision," he said. That was not particularly reassuring. The console emitted another tone, deeper, more resonant, and for a brief moment, the entire station seemed to align around it, systems synchronizing in a way that felt less like reaction and more like agreement. I felt it again, that subtle shift in awareness, like the structure itself had acknowledged something fundamental and was adjusting accordingly. Lyra turned toward me fully, her gaze steady, no hesitation left in it now. "From this point forward," she said, "you do not act independently of the system." I nodded once. That feels like a reasonable expectation, given current circumstances. The man studied both of us in silence, then inclined his head again, more deliberately this time. "The Council will arrive shortly," he said. "They will want to see this directly." I considered that. That sounds like a lot of attention for something I did not mean to do, I said. Lyra's eyes did not leave mine. It was not something you did, she said. It was something you are. The console pulsed once more, and this time the display shifted again, adding a new layer beneath the existing designations, something broader, something that extended beyond individual control. Lyra read it first. Then she looked at me, and there was no uncertainty in her voice when she spoke. And now, she said quietly, they will not be deciding what to do with you. I tilted my head slightly. That is encouraging, I said. She held my gaze, steady, unblinking. They will be deciding what to do with us. The room did not change when he said it, but the meaning did, settling into the space between us with a weight that made everything else feel secondary. I considered the phrase carefully, not because I disagreed, but because it implied something I had been avoiding since the console first lit up. Us is a strong word, I said, because understatement felt safer than accuracy. Lyra did not respond to the deflection. Her attention had already shifted forward, past the immediate moment, toward what was coming next. It is the correct one, she said. The man near the door did not interrupt, but his posture adjusted, subtly, as if he had just updated his expectations for the conversation. Outside, the station continued its quiet recalibration, systems aligning in ways that were not visible but increasingly impossible to ignore. I could feel it now, not directly, but as a steady awareness, like being included in a conversation that did not use words. It was not overwhelming. It was precise, focused, deliberate. You said the council is coming, I said, turning slightly toward the man. How many people does that involve in a situation like this? He met my gaze without hesitation. Enough to define it, he said. I nodded slowly. That sounds like a group that prefers answers. They prefer control, Lyra corrected. The distinction mattered. The console pulsed again, softer now, almost steady, like it had completed its initial evaluation, and was settling into something more permanent. The display shifted, reorganizing its layers into a structure that looked less like a test and more like a framework. I noticed something then, something small but significant. The system was no longer reacting to us separately. It was responding to both of us at once. Not alternating, not prioritizing, integrating. It has stabilized the link, Lyra said quietly, across primary and secondary nodes. I glanced at her. You mean across us? She did not correct me this time. The door signaled again, a different tone now, more formal, more deliberate, like the station itself understood that what was about to enter required acknowledgement. It opened fully this time, not partially, not cautiously, fully. The corridor beyond was no longer empty. 5 figures stepped inside, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that did not require rehearsal. They did not speak immediately. They did not need to. Their presence carried its own introduction. Their eyes moved through the room, not quickly, not searching, but confirming. The console, the light patterns, Lyra, and then me. That was where the silence deepened. Not shock, not disbelief. Something more controlled than that. Recognition without explanation. One of them stepped forward, older than the others, though not by much, his expression composed in a way that suggested long familiarity with situations that did not behave as expected. Commander Lyra Vane, he said, inclining his head with precise respect. You have initiated a system state that has not been recorded in our archives. His gaze shifted to me, not hostile, not welcoming, just exact. And you are the human responsible. I considered that phrasing. I would describe it as involved, I said. Responsible suggests intent. A brief pause followed. Not disapproval. Assessment. Lyra did not step back. She did not yield space or authority. The system initiated the state, she said. He interacted with it. The man inclined his head slightly, and it accepted him. It was not a question. Yes, Lyra said. The word landed with quiet certainty. Another of the council members stepped forward, her eyes moving. Between the console and the two of us, her expression sharper, more analytical. Dual authority recognition, she said softly. Integrated structure. She looked at me again, longer this time. You should not exist within this system. I let out a slow breath. That has been the theme of my day, I said. The older man raised a hand slightly, a subtle gesture that shifted the room back into stillness. The system does not recognize anomalies, he said. It recognizes design. That changed the conversation. I felt it immediately. Lyra's posture did not shift, but something in her focus sharpened, like a piece of information had just aligned with something she had been considering. Then this was not created, she said. It was revealed. The man held her gaze for a moment, then inclined his head again, just slightly. That is our current assessment. Silence followed. Deeper now, more deliberate, as if the station itself was listening for what came next. I glanced at the console. The display had not stopped evolving. It had refined itself into something clearer, more structured, and at the center of it all were 2 points of reference. Not competing, not separate, linked. The woman beside the older man spoke again, her voice quieter now. If the system recognizes both of you as authority, she said, then neither of you can be removed without destabilizing it. I nodded once. That sounds inconvenient, I said. No one disagreed. The older man's gaze returned to me, steady, precise. It sounds permanent, he said. The words settled into the room with finality. Lyra turned slightly toward me, just enough that I could see the shift in her expression, not softening, not quite, but no longer distant either. Measured, acknowledging. Then the question is no longer what he is, she said. It is what we are. The console pulsed once more, and this time the entire station seemed to answer, a synchronized response that carried beyond the room, beyond the immediate moment, into something larger that had just been defined. I looked at the display, then back at her. That sounds like a question with consequences, I said. Lyra held my gaze, steady, unflinching. It is, she said. And for the first time since I arrived, it did not feel like I had been assigned here. It felt like I had been placed. The word permanent did not echo, but it settled into the structure of the room in a way that made everything else reorganize around it, like gravity quietly adjusting without asking permission. No one moved immediately. The council members did not react with alarm or urgency, which told me more than panic ever could. They were not surprised by the implications. They were measuring them. If removal is not possible, the older man said after a moment, his voice even, controlled, then integration must be defined. He did not look at me when he said it. He looked at Lyra. That choice mattered. Lyra did not hesitate. Integration has already begun, she said. The system is stabilizing across both nodes. The woman beside him shifted her stance slightly, her attention returning to the console as it continued its quiet evolution, data streams aligning into structures that no longer looked experimental. They looked established. Stabilization implies dependency, she said. To what degree? Lyra's gaze flickered toward me for a fraction of a second, then back to the display. Complete, she said. The word did not raise in volume. It did not need to. The room adjusted to it the same way it had adjusted to everything else, quietly, definitively. I folded my arms loosely, mostly to give myself something to do that did not involve interfering with systems I clearly did not understand. I'm starting to feel like a very important piece of infrastructure, I said. No one responded. That seemed fair. The console pulsed again, and this time the display shifted in a way that felt less like information and more like intention. New parameters appeared, not labeled in any language I recognized, but structured in a way that suggested authority was no longer a static concept. It was active, dynamic, shared. The older man stepped closer to the console, not crossing into Lyra's space, but close enough that the system acknowledged him with a faint adjustment in light. It did not extend access. It simply recognized his presence. It is not just integrating you, he said, finally looking at me directly. It is restructuring around you. I considered that. That sounds inefficient, I said. I am not optimized for anything. Lyra's expression shifted slightly, not quite a reaction, but close enough that I knew she had registered the statement. You are, she said. The system would not adjust otherwise. The woman beside the older man glanced between us, her eyes narrowing just enough to indicate a new line of thought forming. Then the question is not whether he belongs here, she said. It is whether this system was designed to include him from the beginning. That changed the temperature of the room. Not physically, conceptually. I felt it in the way the silence deepened, in the way the council members did not dismiss the idea outright. Lyra did not respond immediately. She was watching the console again, but differently now, not as a commander overseeing a system, but as someone reevaluating the system's origin entirely. If that is true, she said slowly, then this is not an anomaly. No, the older man replied. It is activation. The word carried weight. Not speculation. Not theory. Conclusion. I exhaled slowly, letting that settle somewhere behind my usual tendency to deflect. I am not sure I like being described as an activation, I said. It suggests expectations. It confirms them, Lyra said. The console pulsed again, stronger this time, and the light patterns along the walls extended further, connecting to systems beyond the immediate sector. I could feel it now more clearly, not as pressure, but as awareness expanding outward, like the station was not just functioning around us, but with us. The woman stepped closer, careful, precise, her gaze fixed on the central display. The network is no longer contained to this station, she said. It is reaching beyond local architecture. I tilted my head slightly. Beyond as in nearby systems, I asked, or beyond as in we should be concerned. She did not look at me. Those are not separate categories anymore, she said. That was not particularly comforting. The older man turned to Lyra again. If this propagation continues, he said, then the authority structure we have maintained becomes obsolete. Lyra met his gaze without hesitation. It already is, she said. Silence followed, deeper than before, because this time it was not about understanding what had happened. It was about accepting what could not be undone. The console shifted again, finalizing something beneath the surface of its visible layers, and then a new designation appeared, larger than the others, centered between the two existing nodes. I did not recognize the language, but I understood the implication immediately. It was not labeling one of us. It was defining both of us as a single operational unit. I let out a quiet breath. That seems official, I said. Lyra did not look at the council. She looked at me. It is, she said. Her voice was steady, but something beneath it had changed, not softer, not weaker, but more direct, as if the distance she had maintained until now was no longer relevant. From this point forward, she continued, the system will not distinguish between our authority. I nodded once. That sounds like a partnership, I said. The older man shook his head slightly. No, he said. It is consolidation. The distinction mattered more than I wanted it to. The console pulsed one more time, and somewhere beyond the room, beyond the station, something answered. Not immediately, not loudly, but with enough certainty that I knew this was not the end of the process. It was the beginning of something larger. I glanced at Lyra, then back at the display. So what happens now? I asked. Lyra held my gaze, steady, unwavering, her answer already decided before the question had fully formed. Now, she said, we find out why. The question did not linger in the air. It moved through the system, carried along the same invisible pathways that had already begun to extend beyond the station, and for the first time I felt the response before I saw it, not as a sound, not as a signal, but as a shift in certainty, like the structure itself had decided it was time to stop observing and start answering. The console brightened, not sharply, but with intention, and the display reorganized once more, this time faster, more confident, like it was. No longer testing outcomes, but selecting one. Lyra did not move, but I could tell she felt it too, the subtle alignment of everything around us, the way the room seemed to narrow its focus to a single point of resolution. It is responding, she said quietly. The council members did not speak. They watched, the same way we did, because whatever came next was no longer something they could interrupt. The system pulsed, deeper than before, and the central designation between us shifted, expanding into a structure that was no longer just identification. It was instruction. I leaned slightly closer, careful not to touch anything, because I had learned that touching was no longer required for participation. That looks like a directive, I said. It is, Lyra replied. Her voice was steady, but there was something beneath it now, something sharper, more focused, like a question she had been carrying for a long time was finally being answered. The display resolved into a sequence, layered and precise, and even without understanding the language, I recognized the pattern. Coordinates, not spatial in the way most systems use them. Something deeper, something indexed. The woman from the council stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she traced the structure of the data. This is not local mapping, she said. It is referencing origin architecture. The phrase settled into the room with a weight that shifted everything again. Lyra's gaze sharpened immediately. Define origin, she said. The woman did not look away from the display. The core network that predates current system design, she said. The foundation layer. I exhaled slowly. So this station is not the main system, I said. It is a node, Lyra replied. And we just activated something that connects beyond it. The console pulsed again, confirming the interpretation without needing to translate it. The older man inclined his head slightly, his expression no longer just controlled, but resolved. Then this is not about control, he said. It is about access. I considered that. Access to what? I asked. No one answered immediately, because the system chose that moment to clarify. The display shifted one final time, the coordinates stabilizing into a fixed reference point, and beneath them, a new designation appeared, larger than anything that had come before. I did not recognize the symbols, but I understood their function. It was not naming a place. It was defining a destination. Lyra read it in silence, her posture perfectly still, every trace of earlier uncertainty gone, replaced by something far more decisive. It is a convergence point, she said. For the network. The woman beside her nodded slowly. And it requires dual authority to access, she added. That made the room very quiet. I let out a small breath, because that part, at least, I understood clearly. So we cannot ignore this, I said. No, Lyra replied. She turned to face me fully, and this time there was no distance left in her gaze, no separation between commander and assignment, only alignment, direct and undeniable. We are required, she said. The words settled into place, not as pressure, but as fact. The console pulsed again, softer now, almost steady, like it had completed its task and was waiting. The older man looked between us, then inclined his head once more formally this time. Then the council will not intervene, he said. This is no longer within our authority. That was not something I expected to hear from a group that preferred control. I glanced at Lyra. That seems like a significant shift, I said. It is, she replied. Her attention moved back to the display, then to the door, then finally to me again. Prepare yourself, she said. I tilted my head slightly. For what? I asked. The system answered before she could. The lights along the walls aligned. The faint hum beneath the floor deepened, and somewhere beyond the station, something responded, distant but unmistakable. The coordinates on the display activated, not as data, but as a path. Lyra's voice was calm, steady, absolute. For where this leads, she said. I looked at the console, at the destination it had defined, at the connection that now included both of us whether we understood it or not. And for the first time since I arrived, I stopped thinking about whether I belonged here. Because the system had already decided that question. What it had not explained yet was why.